to the discussion, to the keynotes today and the discussion afterwards with you. And I hope this will be interesting. So
I let first Teresa to introduce you to the topic, and then I say a few words about the aims of for today and what this is all about. So Teresa, just go ahead.
Yes. So we all know by now that sustainability transformations are needed and that they are unavoidable, because we face global change processes and their impacts. I mean, just to name a few, there is climate change, there is a loss of biodiversity and ecosystem degradation. We face food insecurity and health problems. Then also poverty and inequality in large parts of the world, etc., etc. So this is just to name a few. And we can see in these global change processes that they're often very interlinked, and there is a thematic complexity that demands of us as researchers that we do disciplinary and interdisciplinary collaboration to look thematically, to go deep into these issues and address this complexity. But we also see that there are a lot of conflicting views on desirable futures. So what does it mean? How do we think our futures would look like in a nice way? And also, of course, there are different values and expectations involved. And that demands of us a transdisciplinary collaboration so that we also engage and work together with other people outside academia to really go into these normative questions. And that means that sustainability transformations require action-oriented knowledge. This means research must contribute to the knowledge production that is practical. So it needs to be applicable, it needs to be effective, it should reach the results that we envision. It should be inclusive to take into account different perspectives and values of people, and it should be able to address the complexity that supports sustainability transformations. That means that in a research process that should address all of these issues, the responsibilities of societal and scientific actors, they all become somehow entangled, and the boundaries of scientific work in the traditional sense become blurred. We also see that there is increasing interest in sustainability science, in research on sustainability transitions and transformations, and we can see that on the part of universities and individual researchers, but it's also an increasing demand by research funders. So the European Commission is a good example of this, and of course Finland is a forerunner in these types of research funding instruments with its strategic research. Can you go to the next slide, please? And so the question is really how and when do we use action-oriented or transdisciplinary or co-production or participatory research? So as you can see, there are a lot of different terminologies in this, and there are different backgrounds to each of these terminologies. And it means we see now a plethora of approaches and methods across disciplines, and we think that we need reflection on these different approaches and methods, and we also need some cross-learning between the different things. And so we need to better distinguish when and how we use these different approaches and how we can achieve impact with these. This was one too fast. Sorry, Minna.
Yes, so really for the aims for today is really to promote this critical discussion and the reflection amongst the researchers on when and how is action-oriented research appropriate, and then also provide us some analytical tools and empirical experiences what the action-oriented knowledge is good for. So really when and how to apply the transdisciplinarity and what is the role of the researcher there. This webinar today is a part of a larger kind of seminar series, including some workshops for this kind of a methodological discussion on the critical questions in the sustainability transition and transformations research at the moment. And we have put together this together with Syke, Finnish Environment Institute from Finland, and then CDE from University of Bern, Switzerland, the Center for Development and Environment, and then the Science Policy Research Unit from the University of Sussex. And in all of these organizations, these approaches to sustainability transformations is really critical and in an evolving phase, and we all do research on these areas, but we thought that it's kind of it would be fruitful if we think this further a bit together as well. So we have opened this first webinar to all of you and welcomed and invited a couple of keynotes to stimulate the discussion. First, we will have Gino Cariglia from Austria talking us about the action-oriented knowledge for sustainability, balancing pluralism and integration in a diverse field. And after that, we will have Stefan Rist from CDE from Bern to talk about the transdisciplinarity across spaces and cultures. And then we will have two commentary notes from the research directors of Syke and CDE on reflecting upon this kind of action-oriented research and what is the role of it in these research organizations now and in future. And let's see what they have to say. We have devoted time for collective discussion and questions. There are a few minutes left after each keynote. But then in the end, we can have a more kind of a collective reflection on the issue. So first about Guido. Guido is the scientific director of the Konrad Lorenz Institute for Evolution and Cognition from Austria, and he has studied a lot about this transdisciplinarity and transdisciplinary methods and action-oriented research. And his key message is about that we can have a different approaches, but we all should have a kind of there is a common ground for us and how to find that. And after Guido, we will have Stefan Rist, and Stefan is a professor for human geography at the CDE, and he has worked a lot in different cultural contexts in aiming at promoting the transdisciplinary research for the enhancement of societal transformation in view of environmental justice. Before I give the floor to these to Guido and Stefan, there are a few kind of etiquettes for you to how you can participate in the discussion. So please do add your comments and questions to the chat, and we will take them from there. Either after the keynotes or then in the end, and especially in the end, if you really want to talk aloud, so you are also free to raise your hand, and we can give you a speech. We will record the seminar. The recording has started already, and this will be available in the website then also afterwards. So I will now give the floor to Guido. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Minna. So first and foremost, I'll try to share my slides. It's being a bit slow, but hopefully it will work. Can you see my slide? Unfortunately, I cannot see anybody, so
all good, Guido. Just
all good.
Go
Okay.
Yes.
Good. Well, first and foremost, I wanted to thank Minna, Teresa for organizing this event, as well as the institutions here that are hosting the event. I'm very happy and honored that this topic has been now made object of an interesting workshop and with multiple people from all over the world. At least a positive effect of the situation that you are experiencing at the moment. What knowledge can we generate in sustainability science to support sustainability transformations? In the last years, hundreds of scientists have authored global reports and articles arguing that sustainability challenges from climate change to loss of biodiversity, as Teresa also mentioned at the beginning, can only be addressed through actions that can contribute to generating system-wide and transformative change. Now, these arguments bring about this fundamental question about knowledge, about the kind of knowledge that we need to support these transformations. And why is this question a central question? Well, as knowledge is what we generate most often through research, then if we agree that sustainability research should contribute to sustainability transformations, the answer we give to this question is going to determine, on the one hand, the kind of research that we want to pursue and support, as well as the kind of institutions, the kind of education that we might want to set in place in order to support the generation of this kind of knowledge. In the next few minutes, what I'm going to try to do is to provide you with an approach. Some people might call it a theory even. I keep it on the approach level, of action-oriented knowledge for sustainability. And this approach, this theory of action-oriented knowledge for sustainability, is somewhat condensed by this definition. Action-oriented knowledge for sustainability is the knowledge how that emerges through learning and experimentation when working in integrated ways with multiple kinds of knowledge and ways of knowing to support three main things: the intentional design, shared enactment, and contextual realizations of sustainability interventions. Now, I know this is a mouthful, I know this is a lot, but the rest of the talk is exactly going to be explaining what do we mean, what should we mean when we talk about this kind of knowledge, this action-oriented knowledge. And in case you're interested, we recently published with a lot of other great co-authors from different institutions around mainly Europe. This results in these two articles that you see in the slide: A Pluralistic and Integrated Approach to Action-Oriented Knowledge for Sustainability, and coming out this week, just another buzzword, a systematic literature review of knowledge-related concept in sustainability science. In the rest of this talk, what I would like to do is to go back to the main terms that we're using. So knowledge, action, and especially learning. Then from the knowledge, stepping back to what do we mean by actions, and then going back to what we actually mean by action-oriented knowledge. And I will conclude with some implications that have been actually greatly introduced already by Teresa and by Minna in terms of like the relevance of this kind of knowledge and this kind of research for sustainability science and for sustainability transformations. So knowledge, action, and learning. Very often, in scientific research, we have a linear model, very linear model of thinking about the connection of knowledge and action, where knowledge on the one side is generated often at universities, in scientific institutions, and then is given to those who have to make decisions, take action. And this linear model, for instance, I mean, there is plenty of examples of where it's embedded, but this is an article from The Guardian from 2007, after one of the important IPCC reports was published, and the idea was, okay, the UN has generated the knowledge, now let's do something. Now, will the world act? Or and so here there is the idea of knowledge that is created, that is a thing, right? And that can be passed on from the world of science to the world of action and decision making. The approach to action-oriented knowledge that I would like to provide today is radically different and is really embedded in a different way of conceiving of the relation of knowledge, action, and especially through learning, where knowledge and action are not two separate things that need to be connected, but they are strongly embedded, they are strongly intermingled, they're strongly interwoven in processes of learning and experimentation. When thinking about this approach to knowledge, and especially action-oriented knowledge, I like to refer to pragmatist epistemology, to pragmatist philosophy, when thinking about this, and especially to this book, The Quest for Certainty by John Dewey. However, there is plenty by now of possible ancestors or of possible predecessors of the ideas about the relationship of action and knowledge that I'm going to present to you in the next few minutes. So, from knowledge, action, learning, what do we mean when we talk about actions, or like what are these actions? What are these interventions that we talk about when talking about sustainability transformation? Some interventions can be, for instance, these university-city partnerships that aim to contribute to creating more sustainable cities, more sustainable urban environments. But they can also be school reforms. In this case, for instance, the Perna school in Lucknow in Uttar Pradesh, India, that aim to generate change values system and belief systems tied to patriarchal societies to empower women and girls. But actions can also be, for instance, regenerative ocean farming example. So in a totally different environment, in a totally different context. And these sort of like actions and experiments, interventions, projects, initiatives, you name it, you can call it in many different ways. For instance, in this case, aim to create new ways to grow food and make a living in ways that can heal the planet and also afford for satisfying lives for those who benefit from them. So these are just some examples of what we mean by actions that can contribute to sustainability and to sustainability transformations. Now, what we try to do is to say, okay, if we take all these actions and look at them, try to sort of like abstract a bit and see what are some main shared features of these actions. We sort of highlighted three of them. The first is that these actions are processes, right, or courses of events that are intentionally designed to create transformative change. And the dimension of intentional design sort of reminds us of the normativity embedded in sustainability, in actions for sustainability, but also of the creativity, of the fact that these actions sort of like create or sort of like throw us towards other different kinds of futures and can contribute to their creation. Another feature of another dimension of these actions is that they are enacted by multiple actors. So they involve, we can say, shared agency of many actors and their interactions. And here, if the first part is about normativity, here it's the dimension of justice, of equity, that and also all the power reflections, all the power dynamics that are embedded in the processes of changes that come into the game that constitute these actions. And at the end, in a way, the fact that these actions are always realized in specific contexts, but the implementation is not everything. It's the intent, it's the design, it's the enactment, and it's the realization that make overall what we mean when we talk about actions for sustainability. The contextual realization confronts us especially with the complexity of change, with the fact that we might intervene but not get the results that we want, and that these complex social ecological systems that we are embedded in and that we work in are central to understand if in the implementations of these actions. Now, if these are the three main dimensions, what is and how can we think about the knowledge supporting these actions? And this is the question of action-oriented knowledge, right? For those of you coming from maybe other traditions in sustainability science, this is often called actionable knowledge, usable knowledge, transformation knowledge, practical knowledge. I mean, there is plenty of names. What we try to do here is to highlight some of the main features of this knowledge in relation to these actions as three-dimensional processes. And when thinking about action-oriented knowledge for sustainability, here an important, and if you think about, the cases, the examples that I very quickly highlighted before, the knowledge is not one, and this is an important message, an important dimension of what I'm trying to, what we try to say with this approach, is that there is many different kinds of knowledge that are involved, that are embedded in these actions, and that can support them at the same time they emerge from these action contexts. For instance, and here I'm going to give you the kinds of knowledge that appear to us to be central, but of course they are not the only ones. Here, for the intentional design, generative kinds of knowledge, strategic kinds of knowledge, prescriptive kinds of knowledge. If you think about generative knowledge, think about the Pregna School, for instance, like a school reform that aims to create new value system, or the example of regenerative ocean farming that creates new assemblages of agricultural and social ecological systems. Strategic knowledge that aims to allow for navigating the complexities of a situation while aiming for the achievement of certain goals. But also prescriptive knowledge. And here it's the distinction between descriptive, so a knowledge that about something that is, versus prescriptive knowledge, which is the knowledge that about something that should be, that ought to be, in order to generate change and transformation. If we look then at the dimension of shared agency, here critical kinds of knowledge, so knowledge that questions the status quo, right? If you think about, again, the Pregna School, or a school that aims to empower women and girls, it's based on knowledge that is critical of the patriarchal society and norms that the school is embedded in, but also knowledge that can empower those people and allow for agency of those who don't usually have agency to emerge. And importantly, as it's been mentioned also at the very beginning of today's session, or today's webinar, co-created. It means like this knowledge is co-created by many by many actors, by many people, some of which might be also researchers. And it is in this co-creation context, in this actions context, that the role of researchers, for instance, emerges. And finally, if we think about this third dimension of actions for sustainability, then it is emergent, tactical, and situated kinds of knowledge that are important to allow for the implementation, for the contextual realization. When we talk about emergent, is knowledge that emerges through learning. Tactical is the knowledge, for instance, that in a city partnership you need to have in order to navigate the administrative context of a city, of governance from this perspective. And situated is the knowledge, think about the social, the local ecological knowledge that is needed to set up ocean farming, or even the knowledge that is embedded in the people who want to change the value system of a given region, of a given context. So this is in this nice bowl, in this nice circle, a way in which an approach, a possible theory to understand action-oriented knowledge for sustainability. Now, in reality, we might all agree that actually things are much, much messier, and that these kinds of knowledge come in many, many forms, that they are informed by many different ways of knowledge, many knowledge systems, many different epistemologies. And at the same time, this knowledge is also embedded in multiple ways and interacting with the actions. So in thinking about a theory, in thinking about an approach, I would sort of like suggest that the definition that I gave you at the beginning, that sort of like provides the scaffolding, the theoretical scaffolding of what we would like to suggest that it's action-oriented knowledge for sustainability, should sort of like be in between a clear and ordered notion, right, of these relationships, and a messier one. Depending on one's own culture, I mean, I personally, as an Italian, I tend to, I guess, go more towards the messy one, but there is multiple ways in which one can understand these different kinds of knowledge and dimension, and we, in these works, tried to provide some basic ones, and in a way to sort of like provide some more details to clarify what is this knowledge, how this practical knowledge that emerges through learning and experimentation when working in integrated ways with these multiple kinds of knowledge to support the intentional design, shared agency, and contextual realization of actions. In our idea, this approach, this theory, is sort of like can be useful, and we have been applying and using it both to analyze, and here's the lens, previous actions and intervention context, and but also to as a compass, right, to get oriented in new action context, trying to figure out how to deal with knowledge, what kind of knowledge should be generated if one wants to sort of at least support a process of transformation. So these are the two basic uses that we would suggest this kind of approach can provide to action-oriented research in theory and in practice. I will conclude with just mentioning three main implications that I think this way of looking at action-oriented knowledge for sustainability has for our for the research world and for a sustainability science that wants to create, to generate knowledge that can support sustainability transformations. The first is the importance to embrace experimentation and learning. That is the only way in which this kind of knowledge can be generated. These many kinds of knowledge can be generated. And doing this by cultivating spaces, and there is plenty of examples, and I'm pretty sure most of you are involved in some of these spaces at the Science Society interface, that where this plurality of knowledge is considered, and at the same time where they are also integrated to support action and transformation. And finally, the idea, contrary to the main example that I gave at the beginning of this knowledge separate from action and that needs to be reconnected for action, the necessity, the need to actually work on the conditions, on the affordances for change, so the conditions that allow for change to emerge, rather than living in this in the dream of a modern world where we can actually control and steer the change that we want in the world. I want to conclude by thanking all the researchers that contributed to this theoretical sort of like abstract approach that we came up with about action-oriented knowledge for sustainability. And especially I would like to thank you all for your attention in the last few minutes. And please feel free to get in touch or to ask any questions if you wish. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Guido. That was really interesting. And we have now time for like 1 or 2 clarifying questions, but please keep writing them in the chat. Can you see them, Guido, or should I read them to you?
Let me check. I just stopped sharing the screen. It's low. The chat is loading, so I'm.
So I can give you the first one. In which types of action-oriented knowledge sustainability science is the weakest now? And where should we direct further efforts to?
So that, say it again, sorry, Teresa. Please.
In which types of action-oriented research sustainability science is the weakest at the moment? And where should we direct further efforts to?
It's a good question. Let's say that the weakest sounds a bit judgmental to say, but I think maybe if there is a weakness in this whole in our understanding and pursuit of action-oriented research is, I think, in the acknowledgement of the fact that this plurality needs to be acknowledged and integrated, not much in one specific thing. Also because whether it really, I think, depends on the context, on the goals that are in place. So I wouldn't say there is a specific kinds of research or kinds of knowledge among these that is weaker, but maybe that an acknowledgement of this plurality is something that is somewhat missing in the sustainability world.
Yeah.
Not fully, but.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think there's some more questions in the chat, but I think we should go on with the program. But Guido, if you feel like answering some of them in the chat, then feel free, and then we can also take up some more questions later on in the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the moment, and then I would give the word to Stefan.
Okay. Just a moment. So can you hear me? And can you see my slide?
Yes, all good.
because I cannot see anybody. So thank you very much also for the invitation to this wonderful webinar. And I think I could just take over without having organized it with the last slide from Guido, where he was putting together the conclusions, the implications of what has to be considered if we go for action research in transdisciplinary or sustainability research. So I would like to share with you some insights, some reflections that were coming up throughout my work with transdisciplinary research, navigating through different spaces and cultures. So maybe the recent background for this, and I would like to put it into the context of research on food or sustainable food systems, in order to give you the chance to know a little bit more concretely what it means if we apply these broad principles to a certain context of sustainability research. So I will refer to a research program that we were carrying out in the context of a huge network, international consortium, where we had the possibility to work with very much engaged scientists from South America, Switzerland, and Africa. What we were doing basically is assessing different food systems. We have been considering the range of different food systems, from agro-industrial food systems up to any kind of other small-scale indigenous agroecological food systems and so on. There is a high diversity of forms of organizing agriculture, and we were assessing these food systems through a novel concept of food sustainability that we were developing as part of our project. So I will not go further to details, but just to summarize you some basic features of our findings after 6 years of research, which are important for this topic here. So what did we find? We found that it is true that small-scale, medium-sized family and agroecological farms have higher scores of food sustainability compared to agro-industrial food systems. We also found that agro-industry keeps on rapidly expanding through technocratic, financialized neoliberal restructuring of a food system. It's mainly operating based on accumulation by dispossessing family farms or state-controlled territories from the land, from their animals, seeds, labor, knowledge, and know-how. So, of course, this impedes to enhance existing and create new, more sustainable small to medium-sized family and agroecological farms for the future. So, in general, we conclude that the failure of the global food system expresses power asymmetries between different food systems and poses, hence, of course, a severe food justice problem. So what shall we do towards this background? So one option would be to say, okay, we don't know how to do it better. We keep on doing business as usual. We could also say, oh, why don't we go for the path of sustainable intensification, which would mean to do more of the same, but trying to minimize some of the severest environmental problem of the dominant food system. Or we could even go one step further and follow the proposal made by the World Economic Forum with the Great Reset, which would be kind of culmination of the neoliberal food system restructuring. Of course, my answers to these questions are no, this is not the right way to go, because remembering Einstein, we should take into account that we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we have been using for generating them. So that means our take is that we should rather go for the reconstruction and recreation of food systems beyond the hegemonic, scientific, techno-capitalocratic forms of knowledge, by moving towards more democratic, inclusive, just and comprehensive forms of knowledge. So the way to do that is through transdisciplinarity, which we understand very similar to what was presented by Guido. So we basically understand transdisciplinarity as a process that brings together different forms of knowledge of all sorts, of all type of origins. And what is maybe more important, we understand this as a process. And this process follows 5 basic steps. I would like to detail them right now. The first step is that we are not defining the problems and the solutions alone only by the members of the scientific community. But we have to negotiate what we would like to do, research about, and how we look for a solution together with all food system actors that are not forming part of our academic communities. So having gone for this societal framing of the problem, we move to the next step and integrate what we need in order to define, to work on the defined problem, the contributions from natural and social sciences. From there, we move to the third step, a very important step, and look for how to integrate non-academic actors, and what is important, also their types of knowledge. From there, we move to the first step and engage into a social learning process that defines the meanings of being and acting in the world, in this case, of being part and acting in a certain food system. Based on this, we move then forward and try to organize collective action for the implementation of change with regard to social practices and social structures. So if we do this, then we will immediately find that along mainly steps 1 to 3, there will pop up a lot of controversy. In our case, over the values that have to be expressed in the food systems. We all know that food systems are very differently shaped by different interests and by different values. If we ask ourselves now, where does this come from, then maybe we'll see this more clearly if we look at one important neglected or hidden dimension of transdisciplinarity, which is what we call interculturality. What do I mean with this? I would like to exemplify this with having a short look on social practice of eating, comparing 2 ways of eating that are quite different one from each other. So if we eat industrial food, we can ask ourselves, and where does this come from actually? And then we find out that this comes from modern science, nutrition, and so on, where eating is understood as part of biomaterial machinery or metabolism, focusing on proteins, on carbohydrates, on mineral, vitamins, and so on. So we can now ask one more question and try to see behind this type of producing food, behind this knowledge that produces food, what is the worldview? We do not have so much time, but the general conclusion is that behind this we find a dualistic materialist worldview that assumes that we as humans are separated with regard to our matter, to our body, from the rest of the world, meaning the entities of soul, of mind, of space, of time, cosmos, and so on. If we now take another example of a social practice of eating and refer to Ayurvedic food preparation and eating, then we find that this comes from a different conceptualization of eating. There, the central concept is dosha, which means a kind of individual mind-body unity represented by each of us as human beings. So there, food selection, meal timing, and state of awareness during the meals either increases vitality or increases toxicity. So it's a very different way of knowledge that produces this food. If we ask ourselves now also, and what is the worldview behind this social practice, then we'll see that humans are related and integrated into a wider unity of matter, body, soul, mind, time, space, cosmos, and so on. So you can see, okay, plurality here means to engage in a dialogue between completely different worldviews. So maybe you ask yourself, but what has this intellectual exercise to do with the material structuring of our food systems? This can be shown maybe more empirically and more concretely if we ask ourselves, what are now the basic features of the two worldviews that are behind these different food systems? If we take the dualist food system and go through a series of features, starting with the relation to nature, it is clear that the dualist food systems, represented by agro-industrial food systems in our cases, assumes that nature is separated from humans and everything or everybody is struggling for the survival of the fittest. The notion of well-being is basically defined in terms of egocentric numbers of return on investment, on income, spending levels, market shares, stocks and profits, and so on. The use of science in these dualist food systems is to transform and manipulate plants, forests, soils, water, animals, and the atmosphere. The role of technology is mainly geared towards the generation of material and economic growth, mechanization, digitalization, the use of huge amounts of energy, and so on. The role of finances is of course consisting in the provision of capital for profit maximization, facilitating the exploitation of wage workers by the owners of the capitals, and also exploitation of the nature in order to gain the natural resources required for the process. Agricultural practices are mainly based on the use of high amounts of external inputs for replacing the soil nutrients extracted by the monocultures. And of course, we already know that the type of food is mainly homogenized, standardized, intensively processed, traded, and transported based on nutritional facts. Health problems are addressed normally separately. And the attitudes towards externalities here is that we have the idea that they are basically unavoidable and should be prevented or governed by markets or governments in a separate way. So now let's take these features and compare them to the underlying features of the manifold relational food systems that are existing all over the world. So relation to nature is clear. Humans are inherent parts of nature. Instead of separation, the focus is on the relation of all entities having the same rights to coexist. The notion of well-being is mainly defined by meaningfulness and possibilities of covering material and financial needs of oneself and the others. The use of science is basically consisting in understanding the essence of the coexistence of all these material and immaterial entities. The role of technology basically consists in co-developing tools, machineries, and know-how oriented towards the needs of these coexisting entities. The role of finance here is also to provide capital, but not so much for egocentric profit maximization, but rather for keep running cooperatives, communities, associations, among all the members of the different food systems. The agricultural practices are basically consisting in replacing external inputs by recycling, organic manure, waste, crop rotation, natural nitrogen fixation, and so on. The type of food is very diversified, it's locally adapted, and it must be not only nutritious, but also must be very healthy. So being able to feed not only the body, but also the soul, mind, and their relations with the wider world and cosmos. Externalities are reduced by multifunctional practices based on circular socioeconomic circuits and practices. So you see, it makes a difference how we think about what the food system should be expressing. And if we take it from this point of view, then maybe we can discover why agriculture, now we write it in one word, comes from two different roots. One is the rural part and one is the agriculture. It's the cultural part. Because in this view, you can see that we can understand different food systems as processes of materialization of ontological or cultural assumptions on the existence of spiritual entities, ideas, values that we are keeping in our minds and souls into institutions, organizations, and sociocultural materialities of different food systems. So if we look from there, then we can understand maybe better the way how we think on ourselves and the world means that we have the possibility in a dualist view to understand eating as something that we do, eating from what the world is offering. In this other relational perspective, we rather understand eating as being in the world and giving other entities what they need in order to get what we need for our own feedings. So if we now go one step further and ask ourselves, and how are the internal relationship between agency, between what we can do, what we can change, and the dominant structures are in these two types of different food systems, then we can see that in the dualist food system, we have the problem, we all know that very well, that what is part of our life worlds, the values that are defining our relation to nature, what we understand as well-being, as some of the essential parts of our world, of our life worlds, is being colonized by the interest of the predominant, very strong system structures and powers of the dominant food systems. If we look at the relational food systems, we find a tendency, it's almost the other way around. So the life worlds are being expressed constantly to the degree possible in whatever the aspects are of the overall system, of the broader system, structures and powers that we are related to. So one more aspect, trying to see when we now establish a dialogue between these different cultures or different ontologies, then we can also see that the way of producing knowledge in the two types of ontologies is quite different. We have the scientific ontology where knowledge production goes through the increasing distancing between the subjects and the objects we would like to know or to transform. Whereas in the relational ontologies, we have a different aspect there. It's basically social practices that are trying to narrow down the distance between the subject that wants to do or to know something and the subjects with whom he or she has to interact in order to know or to do something. So here it's not experiments in laboratory, microscopes and so on. It's rather working with introspection, yoga, rituals, religiosities, and so on. So if we establish a dialogue, knowing that these are the difference between the ontologies, we put ourselves into the condition to create common ontological ground for transdisciplinary cooperation and learning. So one more aspect that comes up when we go for this intercultural approach of food system transformation, then we also find the difficulty in the mainstream classical way of understanding policy making. Normally we have like two poles. We have the pole of marketization, where private actors are proposing to operate according to their own interest based on individual choice, freedom from interference mainly. That results in making that today almost any food item has become a commodity. But we know all that if we leave the market alone, it does create too much harm. Therefore, we have the state as the other pole that has to watch out for social protection, create some social stability, redistribution, and solidarity into the functioning of the markets. So when we look from there, and the learning from the food systems movements is very clear. If we are interested not only to have more sustainable food systems in terms of outcomes as such, but if we want to do that in such a way that we can increase justice, democracy, solidarity, or sustainability, then we have to add a third pole into policy making, which is emancipation. That means that we have to do whatever we want to transform in such a way that it is not reducing our possibilities to do whatever we want based on self-determination and political freedom, but to do that in such a way that we can increase or optimize emancipation as well. That means that when it comes to policy making, we say put people first, and policy, science, business, technology, and the whole rest second. That means that when we work from this transdisciplinary perspective on policy making, we do not address in the first place technicalities, but we rather have to start with some broader political issues as you have them depicted here. So I will not go to the detail, but just to say it's about broad policy fields in which we start intervening through transdisciplinary knowledge creation. So let me come now to the end. Which are the potentials of these types of transdisciplinary research for food justice and sustainability? I hope that it became clear that transdisciplinarity allows enhancing food justice and sustainability by first establishing intercultural or inter-ontological dialogue among diverse food system actors and create through this common ground and values that we need really to the recreation of culturally diverse and just relational food systems. We also need to understand that food system restructuring must become much more a democratic process, meaning that we understand it as a materialization of basic values of people on justice, on sustainability, emancipation, based on their own culturally diverse relational ontologies. We also think that it's important to integrate the visions, values, and knowledge of actors, otherwise marginalized or dispossessed by the dominant agro-industrial food systems. And we think also it's important to identify levers for change that allow making the scientific, techno-economic, and productive features of the food system instrumental to the life world of the people and not the other way around. And finally, we see that this type of transdisciplinarity helps us to unleash the emancipatory and democratic potentials of people otherwise subjugated by the power of the hegemonic dualist agro-industrial food system. So for finalizing, some implication that this might have for what is the search for food justice. We can say, okay, we go like the food justice project is proposing as a starting point, trying to optimize within a dualist ontology whatever we can do in order to solve one or another problem. I'm not saying that this is the approach, but this is one option that is there on the table, which would then end up, in my view, with a global network of large-scale, climate-smart, precision agriculture, which could be a kind of consolidation of the separation of humans from the agricultural spaces by using robotization, digitalization, and so on, resulting in having, of course, ever fewer people in the sector of agriculture. And there I see that you have also the great opportunity to not stop halfway, but go one step further and say, why don't we act through transdisciplinarity, a whole range of different aspects into the picture, into the food system transformation that you are working at. So meaning that you should have a look at what is the relation of whatever you do with body, soul, mind, nature, and cosmos. You should also look at what is the role of commons. We could also look at what is the role of solidarity, economy, and fair trade. How is it boiling down in short regional value chains? What does this mean for deliberative democracy within the structuring of the food system? How does this work out in emancipatory governance? And how is this finally related to the huge biocultural diversity represented by all actors being part of the food systems we are working in? So, of course, you can imagine and conclude with me that if we go for this, then we would have a much more diverse, a much more interesting global network of different food systems that can complement one each other. So with this, I thank you very much for your patience. And of course, I'm open to any questions and comments you might be having.
Also, thank you very much to you, Stefan. Very interesting, these talks today. I think we have time for one question now before we go to our commentaries. And there is a question to you, Stefan. Mm-hmm. Why do you need capital to keep running the initiatives in the relational food system? Yeah. Is it not possible to run these systems in more closed markets where resources such as time and work are shared in communities on the basis of shared values?
Yeah, completely right. No, I was putting, and I think it's important to be aware that before we can become independent from, let's say, a global flow and provision of capital through the capitalist institutions in charge of it, being central banks or private banks or states, we have to make sure also that we are connected to these capital streams, no? Because in our research that we were doing with Solidary Economy, of course, the ideal that is well phrased in the question is what guides us. But I think for the next couple of 10 or 20 years, we still must assure that capital is not flowing only to the dominant food system, but also to the relational food systems that want to grow, that want to prosper, and in certain moments, they still need this external support.
Great, thank you. Unfortunately, we don't have time to look at all the questions now, but I see in the chat that there are a lot of questions also to Guido concerning publications. And so I was wondering, can we collect some publications and share them, like maybe make a list and share them with the participants afterwards? So we will do that, and then you get some more insights, those who have put questions concerning publications. And with that, I hand over to Minna.
Yes, thanks a lot both to Stefan and Guido for very thought-provoking presentations, and I think they both nicely highlighted that this kind of a sustainability, knowing about sustainability really challenges our ways of knowing also in many ways. And with respect to that, I would now ask that Sabine and Eva Brimmer from the Finnish Environment Institute and I'm sorry, now I need to Sabine Bieri from the CDE, if you can put the videos on, and we give short commentaries for you that thinking about now this action-oriented research and transdisciplinarity in sustainability science in its wide understanding. So how do you see, what does it do to the research institute of ours now and in future? Short commentaries to this very big question. Eva, you may start, please.
Yeah, thank you, Minna. Thank you, Guido, and thank you, Stefan. Super interesting. It's really a great pleasure to spend the afternoon here. So I'm the research director at Syke, and that's why this question was asked from me. So I'll just say a few words about Syke first. So Syke is the Finnish Environment Institute. So our strategy focuses on sustainability transition and, of course, high quality research and research integrity, but also importantly on solutions and collaboration. And traditionally, this kind of institute, like what we are, has built on monitoring of the state of the ecosystems and looking at pressures on the ecosystems. And we have conducted multidisciplinary research and we have produced policy recommendations. So it has been meaningful traditionally for decision making, at least. And traditionally, of course, it was more linear than what we feel that it is these days. The old challenge that came with this kind of traditional setting was that the recommendations that we produced were not popular. So they would be limiting business and limiting economic activity, and also then resulting perhaps in higher prices, so that even consumers and citizens would see the sort of problems that come with environmental regulation. And so this unpopularity has really driven us to understanding that we need to work with the society, and we have had a more solutions-oriented modus operandi for a fair while now, and we collaborate closely with our knowledge users. And by knowledge users, I now mean beyond the legislator or the policymaker, but all kinds of knowledge users. So also businesses and NGOs and sectors of various environmental activities. But this kind of setup is also evolving. So now we face this huge demand for environmental knowledge, with the kind of recognition that sustainability transformation is really needed. And this forces us to rethink our knowledge production again. We cannot start from understanding the ecosystems and the environment. Apologies for my extra participant here. We cannot start from the ecosystems, but we actually have to start from the societal, social, technical, and institutional systems, and look at our knowledge production from that direction and bring people together. And this is why we are here today, to put more emphasis on this and do this Reflect project that Minna Kaljonen is leading, that has brought us here together, and it has been a super exciting seminar. I will say a few thoughts. So Guido's presentation made me provoked me to think of clarity and organized things, and then on the other hand, the messy and embedded things and how to operate. So I'm thinking of the scientist who would like things to be really clear and there to be a clear pipeline into which the, say, natural scientist or engineer is producing knowledge so that the system would work better, in a way fine-tuning something. How can we be sure that we are actually someone is talking on also, maybe we. Yeah, anyway, how can our more linearly oriented knowledge producers operate in this system? Someone is talking about oat milk, so that's at least a good message for Stefan. Anyway, from Stefan's presentation, I'm thinking about maybe this helps us, this presentation, to think of this organizing the deeply embedded assumptions. And actually, we as knowledge producers who are sometimes very technically oriented, working on environmental problems and solutions, maybe this kind of thinking of like really putting the assumptions and organizing them actually helps us in thinking how we are doing our research, because we are actually looking into robotization and actually distancing ourselves from the, for example, ecosystem that we study. So this really provoked me in thinking of in that sort of ways. So my final concluding note would be that as researchers, we need to carefully also analyze how our assumptions about the systems we analyze sort of direct us, and we need to be critical and supportive and prepared to reformulate. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Eva. I will directly give the speech to Sabine. Are you Sabine here?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, I will make a point about messiness, although I might be totally unqualified as a Swiss. At least I do have an Italian grandpa. But anyway, and it will be rather messy, I'm afraid. I will start with a contribution that we have made at CD in 2019 in the Global Sustainable Development Report, where a whole chapter is actually dedicated to the role of science in transformation. And we had a section there where we tried to sort of split a little bit also types of knowledge, and it was a lot less sophisticated than what we heard from Guido today. What it basically says is you can have scientifically very grounded insights that might not have not reach a societal agreement, or on the other hand, you might have a messiness in terms of how robust scientifically your knowledge is, but actually on the society side there is a consensus about, or you have a high majority that would like to have action in that realm. So you have these combinations and you have to navigate with these, and that might be something that would relate to the strategic knowledge that Guido has pointed out to. And I would actually like to point at these knowledge types that I very much liked, also because CD in its very recent strategy has reinvigorated its its commitment to transformative science, and I think that's exactly where we need this distinction in these different knowledge types. And I would have liked to talk more about these types and how they relate maybe to different levels of transformations. You know, the levels of transformations that we know from the frameworks that, for example, Leach points to when it's about parameters of frameworks, or the value systems that we actually point at. So I would have liked to learn more about how you think about that, Guido. With respect to Stefan's talk, I would have liked to discuss with him the question whether I can see that his distinction is an analytic one, but when it comes to sort of the real world messiness again, I wonder if it's not more of a problem that maybe the dominant framings absorb the more relational framings, because they're so good at integrating those in their very dominant and prevailing discourse. So in that sense, I wonder if that is not maybe a more prevalent concern that we might take up. And then I was glad Eva pointed out that sometimes knowledge production can be unpopular, and I've always been very inspired by Sheila Jasanov's work, which already in the early 2000s has, for the European Commission, for example, they pointed out how the deliberative environments to produce new knowledge for the transformation of the European community towards more sustainable societies, how that would be necessary. And I wonder, Guido, if these deliberative environments that she talks about, if that refers or speaks to what you talked about these not controlling knowledge production, but rather create environments that where such knowledge can emerge. And I wonder how these, I mean, I think Drazanov's work has been very inspirational in that sense, but I think we still need to experiment and to push to create those environments, really. And I would like to, well, I come back to the messiness. Andy Sterling, who can put things so much more elegantly than the rest of us, he says, keep it complex. And I think, yes, that's exactly what our commitment needs to be. We should, be persistent in terms of trying to keep it complex, even though that might not always be very popular. And of course, with these different knowledge types, tactical knowledges, we might be able to navigate better through this complexity that we nevertheless should stick to. So thank you very much. I'll stop it here. And thank you very much for providing this opportunity to discuss these questions. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Sabine and Eva. I think I will directly give possibility to respond to first to Guido and then to Stefan on the issues the issues raised by Eva and Sabine. What do you want to take home from there? Guido, please.
You're muted.
I would perhaps for Guido, I would underline this, what Sabine did end with this deliberative environments and the kind of this, but also Stefan was now highlighting the power dynamics in there. And this is very much talked in the chat box as well. So if you can elaborate that a bit, at least, please.
Guido, you are muted.
Put your mic on, Guido.
I think there is some remote control that mutes me, and I try to unmute it. It's a cybernetic complexity here that we're dealing with. First of all, thank you very much to Eva, to Sabine, and Minna as well for the comments, as well as for the comments in the chat. Indeed, I think, and as Minna maybe was suggesting at the end, I think all these comments go towards the need to think about the multiple ways in which, let's say, science and society intersect. Because I think that from science communication to transdisciplinary research, there is many layers, there is many scales in which these interactions need to be fostered. We need to be a bit more sophisticated in thinking about these intersections, especially in what we like to think about democratic societies, I think. And so I think it's, again, the kind of research that we call transdisciplinary and action-oriented is, I think, on one continuum of this, of a spectrum. But that can only be successful, I think, if it's surrounded and merged in a society where science is communicated appropriately, where there is scientific literacy and knowledge literacy of different kinds, where there is a critical discourse that is fostering then also the opportunity to create real-world labs, living labs, and all these forms of action-oriented research. I think on that, from the sustainability perspective, we should be more interested even in, those who do science communication, education, and from the side of science education and communication, let's say on that side, to be more open to get your hands dirty in the action context, in those contentious situation, in those change processes, and so on and so on. So I think it's really like to be as pluralistic and as open as we can in fostering these interactions and conversations that then can lead to also a more mature public discourse on science and change and these processes. So to say like a final word, I think it's anything goes. in a way, I mean, all kinds of ways in which conversations, actions, knowledge, critical thinking can be fostered. Let's do it. Let's engage in those. And especially also within the field of sustainability science, let's try to overcome these distinctions between I do transition research, I do transformation research, I do action-oriented research, I do participatory research, I do this and that. I think there is a need to get together and to find ways on all levels.
And I think in this respect, you are, Guido, doing very important work in trying to analytically also capture the kind of knowledges that are out there. I think we need that in the meantime, as with the strategy of anything goes, to develop the practices really, to see what it really means for the ways of knowing. Stefan, please.
Yes, maybe this issue now of power relations, how to deal with it in, let's say, this search for bringing actors and different forms of knowledge together. So I think really it's worth to make a try and integrate into this interaction of multiple stakeholders, reflection of all, and in our view and in our experience, almost anybody is able to engage in, let's say, a type of reflection where you ask yourself, what is the worldview that is behind what you consider as important when you struggle in political arenas, for, against, or whatever, different intersection of different food systems and so on. Because what we learned is really that this helps enormously to take power from the powerful and make a more symmetric relationship to those who are not having much control over people, not much wealth, not much medias that they can control in order to promote their interests. But if it's really a face-to-face interaction between people representing these different power players, and you start engaging on a debate on worldview, then the only way of getting let's say, a good stance in the debate is when you have convincing arguments. And that can be done by, as I say, almost anybody. We have nice experience where you have, I don't know, let's say some Brazilian farmer activists from family farmers associations dealing with executives of transnational food companies, But when it's really about the worldview, then it's not worse. If you don't have a good way on justifying why do you think it's important that Amazon must be burned down and you need to profit because if not, poor poverty could not be removed in Brazil or whatever, then the arguments were, this is not very convincing, When you then have normal people and they say, but we do not understand. We all will get burned if the world is going down, So then you oblige people really to reflect and act in a very different way. And that is very productive because in many cases we were able to construct common ground where people say, okay, it seems that we should go there. Also, it's not in my main interest, but why don't we try? Because they see there are other options on the table popping up if you think over your own point of view from the perspective of your own worldview. So I think this is really something, it sounds maybe a little bit esoteric sometimes, that you talk of culture and so on, but it's really a very, very powerful tool to get rid of this situation where you always have that people who control a lot of power resources are distorting process of communicative action, of deliberation. So I think this is one aspect that I really would highlight and recommend to all of you. Maybe we have not been trained at our universities for that, but I think everybody can engage quickly and without too much problem in this type of reflection, build it into its own working process.
There is a lot of talk in the chat box on how to foster this kind of collaboration and learning amongst the research as well in the different places, so to say. Do you have any ideas on this? How could this be taken forward? Just go ahead.
So if, or you, Guido?
No, go for it, Stefan.
So in my view, really to create alliances between those researchers or us interested in getting involved in countering this colonization of dual thinking of those who want to develop other types of food systems, create alliances with people having the strength to really add some power to what we are doing. I think this is, in my experience, the most promising and most efficient way of doing empowerment of what we are doing. So we are not acting on behalf, let's say, of unheard or powerless groups, but we ally ourselves with them, and then we stand up, we appear together at their side, and that strengthens them and strengthens ourselves. Of course, then we face the problem that you mentioned, Eva. This is not always very popular, but we all know that maybe the future is not on the popular side for the moment, but on whatever is outside of the mainstream.
Eva, please.
Yeah, I have three points that could help and have been shown to help in this bringing the researchers into this kind of critical dialogue with practitioners. One is funding. So I actually saw that someone participating in this event was from the Finnish Strategic Research Council that has really enforced this kind of engaging approaches in all the projects have to take it seriously, and this guides researchers really nicely. The second that we embrace in Syke is kind of strategic commitment. So we support researchers in like getting into dialogue first in an interdisciplinary fashion, and then with the practitioners. And then the most important thing is, of course, that people like us today, we are all committed to engaging societal actors. We're interested in it, but maybe our fellow scientists are not as much. And we have a very important role as peer scientists to support our colleagues for whom it is hard to enter into dialogue and really take seriously the practical issues and practical knowledges that we work with.
Thanks, Guido. Very shortly, we are reaching our time. Yes.
I agree with everything that has been added, and maybe emphasizing also what Eva just said of striving for change within the science system, which might mean changing some rules of the reward system for early career researchers. We cannot expect transdisciplinary researchers to accomplish everything that is expected by transdisciplinary research on all fronts, from excellence in publication to engagement with practitioners to action. This needs to change if one wants these institutions to support change. I think it's a fundamental issue, the reward system that is used to support the early career researchers at this point, and then many others. But I think it boils down to, can I have a life within an academic institution if I do this? And am I going to be successful in doing this? And unless the criteria that are used for the evaluations are changed, this is not going to happen. So there is, I think, a strong need for this change in the academic the academic
and it
system.
means also the changing of the values in what is respected by the research and ways of knowing. Really, this really goes back to ways of knowing, and thank you, Stefan, for really highlighting this fact. Now I do thank you all, and I let Teresa to say also a few words. This will continue in our kind of a collaboration with these three institutes that what we come up, but I hope we can come publicly with these discussions more in future during this year at some point, but we figure out how to do that. This is a seminar series, and the next one, which will be organized in June, this will concentrate on the justice issues in transitions, another kind of a rising topic in sustainability transformations. But we have space for seminars for autumn as well, so we might think about continuing with this kind of a action-oriented or transdisciplinary thing further then. But please do come up with your ideas to us if you have any. And thanks for the lively discussions in the chat and being dialogical there as well, although we were not able to raise them to the collective discussion. Teresa.
Yeah, I also would like to thank you for super inspiring talks and discussions and commentaries. And yeah, I'm looking forward to continue these discussions in the future. And for now, I wish you all a good afternoon.
Sorry. Thanks for